you all should be able to see my screen right now. Okay, so for today's webinar, we'll be actually talking about, researching design, designing research, right? So we are essentially trying to break down with you all, what is actually the design that is actually behind the scenes. So today's topic would be more towards, things that's happening behind the scenes, and how we are actually rebuilding or redesigning the unmoderated product of ours. So let me just see if this is working. Okay, cool. So a quick intro about myself. I'm Marcus, and I'm currently the Director of Design at UX Army. I've been a designer since 2012 with a couple of experiences with different agencies, client work, different engagement contracts, and right now sitting with a design team. I'm more of a proactive thinker, and I usually tries to, get my hands dirty, try to, create stuff. Okay, so that's a very quick summary of myself, a designer at the core. So before we start on this topic, right, I just want to leave a thought or thinking to everyone. Like, have you ever thought about how design and research can actually achieve a better synergy? If you think about it, research and design is always about different type of processes that in a way tries to, all together and at the same point where they try to deliver something that is actually a better quality product, right? So there's often a lot of bounce back and forth between research and design, regardless of whether it's, different type of processes. Just to name a few, let's say researchers on the other end is trying to always come up with what are the good objectives and goals that, we should even study about. And designers are often talking about, how can we actually come up with better innovations? How can we come up with better design, right? So there's a lot of the intersection or even conjunction that is actually needed at a much more cohesive or collaborative manner, right? So think of it more like if you're a investigator or maybe a forensic scientist, right? Where your mission is to, from getting clues and traits from the scene itself, are you able to see certain patterns? Are you able to unravel certain mysteries? And from there, are you able to come up with a better solution to basically stop the same thing from happening again? In this case, it would be a bad user experience, right? So, and what would be pretty interesting is that if you all are kind of empowered with speed, right? So think of it as in, if you're a superhero with speed that allows you to quickly go between design and research, right? That would be pretty good in terms of delivering good solutions, right? And that's what essentially UX Army is actually here, to help you with, right? So we basically help, heroes like you all to do different type of lab tests, right? So in this case, users testing. And we actually help you to bulletproof your solutions before they, go out to the world and realize that, actually the solution is not proof at all. And you might actually tend to mess up things more than you could actually solve, right? So UX Army today has a range of different products. So what I always like to think about it is, it's more like an infinity gauntlet where you have different type of abilities that helps you to solve different type of needs, right? So we have a range of different products that offers, things like as easy as you could set things up with putting in your prototype, and then you set your task instructions, and then you send it to the participants where they could take it from anywhere, anytime. And you have things like, deep dive where you could actually do real-time user interviews at the convenience of, not needing to do the logistics yourself, trying to do screen recording, trying to do different type of settings. And you also have the benefit of actually sitting together with your product team or your design team in the observation room where they can actually look at what are the kind of behaviors that users tend to actually do, right? And we also have things like tree testing and card sorting exercises that essentially help you to find out what is the mental model or what is the information being treated to normal participants, right? To your normal regular consumers, right? And we also have our own user panel, participants where they are kind of like ready, ready to take on the test anytime, and there are people who are actually all over the world, right? So, and we also serve clients from, that ranges from different, different types, right? They goes from startups all the way to enterprises, and they usually goes across different industries and domain as well. Okay, so back to our topic today. So we'll primarily be talking about usability testing. So usability testing is actually our oldest product in the product line. And we often treat more like a legacy system where it actually has, it's doing pretty good at the start. But then we do realize that there are actually much more potential to be able to, like move it forward, right? So the question that we're always asking would be, like, why are we trying to do the rewrite now? Why not earlier? Why not in the future? Why now, right? So there are a couple of things that we're actually looking at. So one is we look at what are the, current user struggles. So it turns out that when we look at the product itself, today usability testing allows users to be able to, set up tests as soon as they have a concept, an idea, or even a prototype that they would like to get feedback from the participants, right? So what we realize is that, our users are basically having high learning curve, right? So what it meant by that is that a lot of times when user actually get started and when they try to create the test, they are stuck with what are all these different features, meaning to them. And there's also a lot of all these different technical jargons and terminologies that is way beyond their understanding. So oftentimes they kind of get bombarded and they are not really sure how do they proceed forward with creating a test, right? Alongside with that, there's also inconsistent design languages and different type of, the same keyword being used in different places where they actually express different meanings, right? And there's also the commercial side of it, right? Like how do we, take this system that has a little bit of a history, how do we actually, move it forward and improve it so that it's much more flexible? So what are the challenges that we face here? So when it comes to, doing such a redesign of a system, it always needs to start with identifying where would be the critical part where the groundwork needs to actually happen. And usually that would mean that we also need to have the scalability in mind, right? Because when we are actually invested to do a redesign in this process, we are expecting that in the long run, things can actually scale up with time, right? So it's often about balancing between what are the current, short-term goals versus the long-term goals, right? And we also need to strike a good balance between getting new users who are actually, using the product to be comfortable, as much as, also getting the existing users who have already been developing some kind of familiarity with the product. So we also need to ensure that those users are being taken care of as we do the redesign, right? So think of it more like a restoration work of a, of an old building, right? So when it comes to an old building, we basically tend to not tear down the entire building and rebuild everything, right? So what we tend to do is we try to look at which are the areas that needs to be worked on immediately. And we try to identify which are the things that needs to, be worked on next, right? And a huge part about the challenge of redesigning such a system is that we often need to have good understanding about the problem space. In this case, we also need to be able to evolve together with our users. For example, people like you and me, or other researchers or designers in different teams, right? And different teams would actually expand with different needs of user research, right? And last but not least, we also have this challenge about how do we actually tackle between knowledge gaps that exist in different functional teams. So where does research comes into the picture here, right? So a good thing about our redesign process is that our researchers are actually, onboarded with us right from the very beginning, throughout the entire process. So, but a good way for us to gauge like where does research comes in, is as what I'm actually illustrating here in the slide, where you could think of it as 4 key checkpoints, where we first do research to understand at the early stage what are the potential opportunities like. Are there still the current, pain points? Are there new problems that is actually coming into the picture? So we do a bit of a generative research where we discover what are the potential things that we should actually tackle on. And then at the later stage where the design team has prototypes or design concepts, we basically run them with our responders or with our participants again, and we find out how good or bad is the design concept, and which is actually much more potential for us to move forward with, right? So we do another checkpoint here. And then before we launch the product, we actually do another round of validation, right? And after we launch the product, we also still need to maintain a good, mindset that once the product is launched, it's not just something that you just, stop doing any part of research. There will still need to be some kind of a discovery process in mind, where we need to constantly feed in with what are the new problems that kind of arise as soon as this solution is actually, being delivered. Right. So I could say that research is something that needs to be constantly coming to the picture at any point of the product, right? So just to quickly illustrate, right? So what we have been doing, a huge part of the time, we have been constantly running across with different teams where we try to fill in the requirements and we try to refine what are the narrow down requirements and needs that needs to be solved immediately, right? And that also includes a lot of the feasibility checking along with our tech team, that are certain things possible, in the short term, or what can be bring forward to the next phase, right? So there are a lot of the things that we need to have very rapid conversations, and we need to, align in a way that what are the things that can be done, right? So then all the UX planning and the UI delivery and the design process comes later then, right? So so when we say users, right? In this case, the users are basically people like, like you all, right? So designers, researchers, right? So the key person that is actually using the product in this case would be designers who are doing usability testing themselves. We also have researchers who basically got the design prototypes from their design team members, and then they try to work on the usability testing, themselves. And then on the other part, we also have startups or smaller teams or younger teams that doesn't have a lot of UX resources but still wants to do user testing. So we also need to make sure that we make it very simplified, that it kind of caters for such users as well. So we did a bunch of initial brainstorming, and we started asking ourselves with a lot of questions, right? A lot of high-level questions, where we wanted to actually understand what are the different stages when it comes to such a task creation, right? So when the user starts to create a task, what are the considerations that they have in mind when they are, like doing during the test, what are the different things that they have, set on. And right after the test, like, are there certain expectations that hasn't been met, right? And we also have a lot of, questions about how will this product evolve in a long run, right? So those are the very initial questions that we ask ourselves, right? And we involve basically, our stakeholders, researchers, designers, and at some point our tech team as well, to basically get them to align on the same picture. And then we try to look at how can we actually proceed forward, right? So, and then we went on with basically doing a lot of information grouping. So in this case, it could look very small, but then what we are essentially trying to show here is that, we try to look at, for example, when when someone is actually trying to create a usability test, what are the type of questions that comes into their mind, right? Are they selectively choosing a specific method to work on? When they choose a certain method, what is their intention like, right? Do they want to, test it on a certain device? Are they wanting to use certain settings that we haven't ever thought about it, right? So there are a lot of different questions that we try to, expand on. And then we try to actually map each of those informations together with each of the categories that we have in mind. Right. So once all this has been done, then we only start with, basically the design process, right? So we started by thinking about how should we actually approach this, this entire design process. So one thing that we, has been really keen on doing is that we wanted to make sure that everything that we design can be a very modular one, right? So what does it mean by that is that when we try to design a certain feature, it needs to be something that can be, easily, let's say, dock or undock, and then we need to have certain ways to be able to, allow users to, let's say, skip certain features out because of the different type of, let's say, different type of user needs or different type of context that they're actually trying to build on, right? And what we did later on is we create quite a lot of different wireframes based on each of the ideas that every team member has. And from there onwards, we try to shortlist it and it will come with two different prototypes that we try to actually test it, right? The other part that hugely influences the design process would be where design system comes in, where we want to actually find out better ways to scale up the components or the different types of designs that we have in the solution, right? So you can see that here we have different type of different kind of ideation that is actually based on the entire week of brainstorming session. So we have different ideas, and then some of the ideas that tend to, be pretty unique. Some of the ideas that tend to actually overlap with each other. But from there, the benefit from us is that we tend to be able to look at what are the pros and cons from each of the solution. And then we try to, find a good way to combine some of the good points, and we try to further on improve on the ones that are actually not so good, right? So what we then do is we actually try to come up with, solution, right? The other part that is actually very important in our redesign process would be how do we fill up the gaps when it comes to cross-functional teams, right? So in this case, right, when we talk about, let's say, one of our main feature in the usability testing product, we have a feature that allows users to today import Figma prototypes into the system and use those as a testing method with the participant, right? But oftentimes what we realize is that it's very easy for designers to say that, hey, I'm very familiar with things like Figma, so I don't think we actually struggle at this point at all. But it turns out that, what we have actually understood are not being understood by the other team members, right? So for example, when it comes to things like a very, detailed integration with Figma into the system, the developers has no way to tell from the data or from certain information on what does this information mean to them, and is there a different use case based on how the designers all over the world are actually designing the prototype on, right? So what we do by then is we try to map it down into what are the different possible informations that developers would tend to see. And then we also try to map it out by different cases where what are the, let's say when a designer does this in the prototype, what would be the kind of information that would be different when they are importing the prototype into the system. And if there's actually certain things that kind of, let's say errors that kind of occur, is there a better way to actually handle that process, right? So a huge part of it can only be done by having that, a cross collaboration between different team members rather than, just working on, delivering a design itself. So here we actually come up with some of the very initial concept when we are working on the further iteration after, checking with our users, right? So what we did here is that we try to look at how can we basically make things simple for the users to actually try on, right? So what we did here is that we try to simplify the whole design by making it easy for people to, on the left-hand side, they will be able to actually interact with the different task instructions in mind. So these are kind of like individual task boxes that you could actually lay it all around the task. And then on the right-hand side, you have actually different ways for people to, put them into the boxes or put them into the screen. And from there, you try to customize based on what are the questions or what are the exercise that you need to actually run it through with your users, with your participants, right? And then we try to work out with a couple more concepts. And then we do another round of testing with our users and also our internal members, right? So what we get at the end of the day would be a range of different informations. And what we do here is the researchers actually help us to map them according to different sentiment, different stages of the journey, so that we could actually look at what are the good and bad of each of the process or each of the design decisions that we actually made in the initial concepts. Okay. And the other part would be where the design team really, tries a lot in terms of spending the effort with, which is the design system. So here, what we did is we try to actually, pinpoint what are the components that we'll be needing to use in this, task creation process. And we try to break it down into parts where it's actually at a very, very atomic level where things could not be further, break down. And then we try to look at what are all the possible combinations that could be happening in a single component. Okay, so this part I will actually try to cover it later on, right? So, and a huge part would be we are constantly creating a lot of components, right? But if you wanted to talk about, let's say doing all the components in one shot, it's actually very hard for, such a thing to really happen, right? So because the thing is like when it comes to a system this complex, there are a lot of things that you need to keep in mind, right? But one thing that we would definitely recommend is that you can actually try to identify first with what are the most repeated components that is being used within the product or even within the team. And then from there onwards, you try to prepare those components and you try to scale it up from there, right? So this would actually help us to reduce the UI inconsistency, right? And we also need to adapt a different mindset rather than today, someone comes to you and say that we need a new UI or new design on a certain part. We need to always be able to study what is, the reusable part of this new design, right? Is there certain components that could be reused? Are there certain things that doesn't need to basically, gets, like reinventing the view itself, right? So there are a lot of things that we actually try to look at it. And from there, I would say, coming up with a good planning of what we tend to do with the design system and also all the components that we have in mind is really important. So this is actually one of a example of how our components are actually looking like. So you can see that from the screen, what we are able to do is that we actually break down each of the components in the screen at a very, detailed manner, and where we classify them by different type of user intention. So what this means is that, for example, if today you want to switch on from, let's say, a different tab, what that would allow you to do is that you would be able to switch from different tasks, and from that different task, we have already prepared the component in a way that you would be able to see only the relevant settings being assigned to that component itself. So by doing this, it actually helps us to quickly, let's say, match up with different cases that we are building on, especially when it comes to different user flow that we are building and we're trying to test. And it also makes it easier for new features and new design to come in the longer term. So what is actually the improved UX for our usability testing, creation process, right? So one thing that we are very happy with is the concept of actually test settings panel, right? So in the test settings panel, basically it allows the users to have much more control over what are the possible features that is being allowed in the test itself, right? So today in our platform, we actually have a bunch of different type of settings. So that goes in different type of needs. For example, if you are creating a test and you need to, run them through a legal document, you could actually allow a non-disclosure agreement, and you could attach your PDF or your document there, and you require the users to basically read through the document and agree with it before they are able to even take the test, right? And let's say if you want to allow the participants to be able to self-reportedly answer that, are they fitting in a certain requirement? And based on that requirement, you decide to whether screen them out because they might not be the right participants that you're looking for, therefore not being allowed to take the test and proceed forward. So then you could actually work on a screener process, right? And there are also different type of settings. For example, we have transcription being enabled, and we also have webcam for certain type of tests, right? So transcription, when, it is pretty handy when you have participant that is actually coming from different demographics and they use a different language, right? So transcription could be pretty handy for you to actually help your team to understand better on what is actually being meant by the giving in the feedback, right? And the other part that is a benefit for us when it comes to test creation, especially for the users, is that we try to give a relook on how are we looking at each of the different task types, right? So when I say task types by user intention, we are basically mapping the user intention by what is the objective that they are trying to achieve when they want to create each of the tasks. For example, the kind of very technical term that the internal team usually understand is that, we give them a criteria and we give them a time setting, right? But a lot of times the users might not even be able to get like what does it mean by doing that. And we actually have to run it through a lot of different way of describing what does this task type actually do, right? So right now what you're seeing on the screen is that we try to actually split by very clear intention, where let's say if you try to run a task and you want the user to basically do, do a certain exercise in a short amount of time, you could use a time limit task where you set the time there, and then there'll be a certain duration that will be counted until the time is up, right? And the other part would be, let's say, do we need to split between single select questions or multiple choices, right? And it turns out that actually a lot of the users, when they have multiple selection or multiple options in mind, they do not actually want to click on different task types, because for them, their intention is to have a question and then they're split by different options, and whether they could actually do single select or multiple select, that's more like a additional setting in the same task, rather than being treated as multiple task types, right? So that's what we are actually, able to kind of break things down into in a way that people are able to understand it more. And then what we also improve from this process is that we also have this idea of integrating the built-in screener into the task creation itself, right? So for those existing users, they are actually familiar with the built-in screener, but then they weren't able to find out how they basically connect with each other, because in the existing system, the built-in screener are basically split between the task creation process and the individual screener process, right? So what we do here is that the users are able to actually see that when you are building a test, you would be able to actually split the screener by criteria, and only if they are able to actually pass through the criteria where those participants kind of met what the researchers or the designers are looking for, then they are allowed to basically take the test that kind of starts from where the first task is, right? So that's what we also have been, being able to build that into the product, right? And the other part would be other use cases like, can the users be able to shuffle the different tasks in a test? And if I'm kind of like getting stuck because I'm not really sure what is the right way or right words or right instruction to write in a test, can I get some team members for me to give me a comment and help me to improve the task creation process, right? So we also have a comment feature that allows the users to be able to collaborate with each other and therefore improve the task by even before that they are actually launched to the market, to the participants. And another huge benefit that we are giving to the users would be, the transparency or the visibility of what are the possible recruiting options for a participant, right? So let's say if you create a test, what are your options to kind of go about recruiting participants, right? So here you can see that, we are actually giving you two different options where you could either invite your own testers to basically respond to a test that you just created, or if you kind of feel the need to basically engage different type of specific demographics or specific criteria, you could actually use our UXHarmony panel testers, right? Where from there you could actually use it to further specify what are the demographics that you need, what is the age group like for the testers that you're looking at, where are they seated in, and then we also make sure that for all this process, it needs to be visualized with clear indications of what stage are you in, are you able to make the payment correctly? And are you able to also look at what is your remaining credits, right? So all these things actually comes to the picture when it comes to task creation. And this is actually just a quick overview about how the current new design would actually look like. So you can see that in this new design, the users can basically select what are the different task type based on their need. And let's say when it comes to a prototype task like this, you would be able to basically put in different prototype that's being supported here, okay? And what you actually get is you'll be able to see, your own prototypes, and you can go and specify what is the criteria that you need to set. so that you could understand if your users are able to go from point A to point B. Okay, so that's in a way a pretty good way to set the test itself. And you also have things like, for example, the comment feature that I just mentioned. So where you could actually use to interact or collaborate with your internal team members. Okay. And there's also things like, for example, if you wanted to do further settings, this is where you basically toggle your settings panel, right? So, and you'd be able to do things like what I just mentioned, basically doing screener. And those screener would allow you to basically have accept or reject criteria where you choose to set a certain questions and allow them to bring forward to the test. So just a recap of the user benefits that we are able to bring from this new design, right? So a good thing is that the user generally has a lower learning curve with this new design. They have better visibility in terms of different features. They are able to feel much more in control because previously in the older design, they weren't sure like what are the test settings equivalent of. And a part of the worst scenario is that they aren't even aware that certain settings actually exist within the system, right? And then we have clearer intention being mapped towards the task types. We are able to, better state between the different status of a task, whether it's in the task creation mode, whether it's in edit process, whether it's live, or are they basically at the stage of recruiting participants? Are they dealing with payment issues, right? And we also have, improved the preview process where it allows the users to be able to preview how the test will actually look like, what are the different languages that they could actually transcribe to, so that they are much more confident in what should they expect from those submissions or from those video recordings, right? And then we have a collaboration process being enabled with comments. And basically, users are able to appreciate better between different type of recruitment methods being offered in the same system, right? So what are the learnings that we have here? So the learnings here is that when it comes to redesigning the legacy system, I think the key point is to not make enemies with other team members, because in this way you basically just helps to make things worse, right? But what would be more important is that you try to develop a good alignment and you do it in a very close rapid frequency where you are able to constantly align with each other, so that you make sure that when you are developing this whole design, it doesn't actually puts any of the team in the middle of nowhere, right? And the other part would be try to keep the changes not too extreme, because as you know, users aren't very familiar with, aren't very comfortable with actually changing their habit, right? So don't change everything. Try to align it incrementally with much more clearer visible steps. And the key thing here is to always think deeply and start small, right? Last but not least, I would say this whole redesign process wouldn't be a short journey, right? So try to embrace the process, try to find good fun ways to actually work with others, especially when it comes to different team members, right? So in our case, we actually use a lot of different tools. We use Miro boards, we use Figma, we use our own tools, we use different type of way to illustrate different information, right? So find good ways, good creative way, good fun ways to basically work along the journey. Okay. So with that being said, right, so I would leave a statement here that this is probably just the beginning, because right now what we are doing is only on the task creation process, and we have already started to map out like what would be the much more better improvements to kind of come into the picture, right? So we are always continuously building, And things that comes in would be, let's say, what if we are able to allow users like you to have better analysis? What about things like, the very popular topic today, what about AI? How can AI actually helps us to basically, work on things in a much more efficient manner, right? So with that being said, right, that's probably the end of my sharing. And I'll probably open up a few questions in the webinar here. So if there's any question, maybe let me look at the questions. Okay, so yeah, I'll leave a few minutes here, and if there's anyone that has any question, right, feel free to kind of let me know. Okay, or else we will probably be ending this session in another 5 more minutes. Are there any further questions? Seems everyone is doing pretty cool here. Yeah. So okay. So I think if there's no question, then we'll probably stop the webinar for today. So I think for those who have actually joined and tuned in to the very end, I would say thanks a lot for joining the webinar today. And if there are any more questions, or you just like to understand more about our products, feel free to reach out to any of us, right? So thank you for joining. Okay, goodbye.